finally time to take a look at the updated Dimensional Robos. So, Daikaiser strikes back after quite a while. He's been a strong deck all the time, but now with his support from Trinity Dragon, he's gotten even stronger. And now, my philosophy when building this deck list, and while preparing this deck list that I'm going to present to you today, is making a deck list that will last, a deck list that will age well, and one that you can still refer to even if we don't get Dimensional Robo support for quite some time. Now, I do, even though like the last Dimensional Robo deck profile I did was over a year ago, after each regional tournament I tend to post my deck lists, and there was one after last year's regionals that I used D Robos in. So there are obviously always changes, and you know, the deck profile I did last time was with HG units. You know, I felt like it didn't age that well, mostly because of HG units, but also just because I only at that time had 2 of these bad boys. But you know, all those factors combined, I think they kind of went for basically just not a very well-aged deck profile. So what I'm aiming for today is to explain everything that I decided to have in this deck, and you know, make it so that it ages well and that it's not just full of text that's relevant for this meta only. So let's go over the deck list, and we're going to start off with the grade 0, of course, which is Dimensional Robo Daihawk. So Daihawk's skill is a Forerunner, as with all starters, and then he has an Act. You choose 4 of your rear guards with Dimensional Robo in their card names and put them into your soul. If you have a grade 3 Vanguard with Dimensional Robo in its name, choose up to 1 face down card with Dimensional Robo in its card name from your G-Zone and stride it on Vanguard Circle. So, Daihawk is the starter of choice, and I know there are some people that will disagree. There are some people who think this is a bad card, and I can understand why, because in most decks, negging 3 to 4 isn't seen as that much of a good thing, especially when you don't know what's going to come after. When you look at just this card and nothing that combines with it, I can understand that. But there are a lot of factors which lead to the fact that this is a good card. One of which is the very obvious that you stride into none other than Dai Earth, who gives you 2 cards back out. So in that way you're not losing as many units as you would with someone like Goyusha, for example. But another reason is that ever since Vanguard G started and Stride began and GB1 began, people have been grade stalling. There's been a lot of grade stalling decks that have been created because of that, like, you know, Aqua Force that stalled on grade 2, Grand Blue that stalls on grade 1 and just prevents people from striding. This card comes over that. It doesn't matter, this doesn't care what grade your opponent is on. It only matters that you're on a grade 3 Vanguard. It doesn't matter what your opponent is on. They could be on grade 0 and you could stride. So Daihawk is a really cool starter, and you know, there's just, even though, you know, Sibreeze exists, a lot of great stalling still happens because first stride is so decisive. First stride can just literally mean the whole game at a lot of points, and especially when you're facing some of the more meta clans, as at the moment, Time Leap and, you know, Night Rose, or well, meta decks rather than clans. So Daihawk is the starter of choice. He is the best. I was a bit skeptical about him when he was first revealed, but after testing him and theory crafting, he's just so good, and he's definitely the best starter of choice. If you're not convinced yet, then please do give him a try at least, and then see what kind of conclusion you make. So now we're going to go on to the grade 3s, and we're going to start off with my favorite card in the entire game, and the card that does make a lot of people salty when they face it, which is Super Dimensional Robo Daikaiser. So he's got his 2 arts now, so we're going to be taking a closer look at the newer art, because I do prefer it as well. We don't have the Japanese alternate art, sadly, so there's that. So Daikaiser is a break ride from quite a while ago. His skills are, first off, a limit break 4. When a Dimension Police unit rides this unit, you may counterblast 1. If you do, you choose your Vanguard until end of turn, it gets plus 10k and a critical. And the skill that when you drive check a grade 3 Dimension Police card, you choose one of your opponent's guardians, retire it, and that unit's effects with cannot be hit are nullified. His second skill is, when he's boosted by a Dimension Police unit, he gets plus 2k power until the end of that battle. And finally, he's a Lord. So Daikaiser is just a very defining a very defining card for Dimension Police. Before Daikaiser, DP was more of a kind of, you know, combine and then tank. Well, now it's, you know, combine and break shields and steal wins in that way, or, you know, we have some new tools that we'll go into later that help you achieve wins in different ways. But Daikaiser is my favorite card. I have so many reasons why it's my favorite card, but they're all quite personal to the point that I don't even really want to talk about them. But He's just such an amazing card. I know a lot of people, you know, get salty about him. I can understand that, but you know, I'm not the person you should be expressing that to because I love this card too much. So 4 of him, because he is the focus of the deck. He's the grade 3 you want to be on by default and then go into other things later on. One of said things is the Legion, which is true Ultimate Dimensional Robo, Great Daikaiser. True Great Daikaiser's skills are, first off, he legions with Great Daiusha, so we're gonna take a look at him later. Second skill is, during your turn, if this unit is in Legion and the number of cards with Dimensional Robo in his card name in your soul is 3 or more, he gets an extra critical. Third skill, when this unit's drive check reveals a grade 3 card and your Legion mate's critical is 2 or more, you can counterblast 1. If you do, choose one of your opponent's guardians, retire it, and that unit's effect with cannot be hit are nullified. So, we play 4, some people play 3, and I think that's fine because my overall grade 3 count, when you take a look at these last 2, is 10, but you can play 8 or 9. So another reason why Daihawk is good is because there are times when you won't have the 3rd soul that you need for him, so he will definitely give you the soul that you need plus a surplus, and we do have one card in this deck that will help you make use of that surplus, so we will go into him later. But let's go over the last grade 3 for the deck, which is Ultimate Dimensional Robo, Great Daiusha. Great Daiusha's skills are, Limit Break 4. During your turn, if the number of cards in your soul with Dimensional Robo in his card name is 3 or more, this unit gets plus 2,000 power and plus 1 critical. Then, on Vanguard and Rearguard Circle, if you have a non-Dimension Police Vanguard or Rearguard, this unit gets minus 2,000 power. And finally, if you have a card named Super Dimensional Robo Daiusha in your soul, this unit gets plus 2k power. The only ability that you really need to pay attention to is the Limit Break, because essentially when you have the 3-dimensional Robos in soul, he has the critical that you need for a Great Daikaiser, and you know, you have the 3 soul for his guard break skill. So a lot of people, if you want to play less grade 3s, if you want to play 9, then either put Great Daikaiser to 3 or put Great Daiusha to 1. If you want to play 8, then you put Great Daikaiser to 3 and him to 1, but you definitely have to keep the original Daikaiser at 4. He's just very, very decisive of games, because when you break ride Great Daikaiser on top of Daikaiser, you give him a crit, and then from his skill, if you have the 3 soul, he gets another crit. So if he hits for 3 damage, which usually will seal off the game, and if you have more crits, then he'll for more damage, and if you have a Laurel, then it's going to withstand. So very, very, very important combo, and you know, just overall very good cards. But I myself am I'm happy with this grade lineup overall, but I'm definitely in favor of also, you know, putting down this by 1 or this by 1 for, you know, other cards. But let's go over the rest of the units in the deck before we talk about it anymore. So next up we will have our grade 2s, and we have the first, which is a complete staple in Daikaiser, which is Dai Bazooka. So, Dai Bazooka's skills are, when this unit attacks, if your Vanguard has Kaiser in its card name, this unit gets plus 2k until the end of that battle, so it's an 11k attacker. Second skill, in the trigger zone, if you have a Vanguard with Kaiser in its card name, this card gets grade plus 1, and when your drive check reveals this card, you countercharge 1 and soul charge 1. So, this is important to be at 4. It's a staple at 4 because when you drive check it, it's a grade 3. Meaning it triggers both of their skills. So with him, I actually have 14 grade 3s. That's why you can put down a bit more of these, because you have these 4 at all times. Before Dai Bazooka, there was no way you could put these down because they were like, you just had to play more grade 3s essentially. But Dai Bazooka makes that possible. He also gives you a counter charge, which is super good. He's so good for his counter charge. That's why you don't play perfect guards, the unflipping perfect guards in this deck. And the soul charge is also good because sometimes if you drive check him and you only have 2 soul, and let's say you're attacking with Great Daikaiser, if you drive check him and then get the last dimensional Robo unit in your soul, then the effect activates and he's a grade 3, so you get that grade 3 piercing skill immediately. And I have confirmed this with a judge, so you know, I'm pretty confident in saying this. But overall, he's just such a good card. Him being an 11k attacker is also nice because he can swing on his own when necessary. So overall, super good card and just definitely a 4 of staple in Daikaiser. Next up, we have 3 Dai Jets, and you can play 4, but I think 3 is the absolute minimum, but I had to put him down to minimum just because I again want this deck to kind of, you know, last, but I'll, you know, talk about what you can take out to put him at 4. So Dai Jet's skills, well, skill is an act once per turn GB1. You choose a grade 3 card with Dimensional Robo in its card name from your drop zone and put it on top of your deck. You shuffle your deck, you give your Vanguard plus 4k until end of turn, and the skill that when the Vanguard's attack hits a Vanguard, you can count it blast 1 to draw a card. So he is super good because it recycles grade 3s. You know, recycling grade 3s is good for their skills, but it's also good because it gives you basically just non-stop stride fighters. Having 2 of them on the field is just going to give you 2 stride fighters back into your deck every time, and that's really, really good. And like the fact that he recycles stride fighters is essentially the most important point. And you know, the sweet bonus on top is that, you know, it triggers both the Daikaiser. So I would like to play him at 4, but because of this next card I play him at 3, but you can put this guy from 3 to 2 and put him up to 4 if you feel like it. But for now I'm okay with Daijet at 3 and this at 3, and this new card is Dimensional Robo Dairessen. So looking like Mega Man Zero, let's go over his skills. First one is, during your turn, this unit gets plus 2k power for each face-up card with Dimensional Robo in its card name in your G zone. So it's only during your turn, but we have quite a lot of Dimensional Robo G units. Second, if you have a Vanguard with Dayusha in its card name, he gets plus 2k power. This also works in your opponent's turn. Third, if you have a Vanguard with Daikaiser in its card name, this unit gets plus 2k power. This also works in your opponent's turn. So when you have him on the field on your opponent's turn, and if you're in Legion, then he's 13k, but you know, if you're just on him during your opponent's turn, then he's 11k. Another thing that you can do is when you stride into Daikaiser Leon, you can select Great Dayusha as a heart, and then you will both have Daikaiser and Dayusha in the name, because it inherits the name as the heart, so you'll be able to use both of those skills, and then anything on top that, you know, comes out on top. So you can put down Dairessen to 2 to play 4 Daijets. I just chose to play 3 Daijets for this, because so far it's been running well, and I don't feel like I'm missing him most of the time. But this is also the point where I say I want this deck to last, because Dairessen overall is going to be good for a while, but right now, in March 2017, as I'm making this video, the meta is really fast. Early game is a problem, and Japan has adapted a thing which I am very fond of, which is adding in 10k vanillas. I myself will most likely be taking out these 3 Dairessens and one of these grade 3s in order to play 10k vanillas, but in this meta, because it's so fast. It also depends on your region. You know, you need to scope out your region, see what your region is playing, what's being played at your local card shops. Are people playing fast? Are they playing slow? If they're playing fast, then take out the Dairessens and, you know, put in these 10k vanillas, because you're gonna need them to, you know, survive for the chance for you to win, basically. But if you're meta slow, if people are a bit more casual, then you can play Dairessen safely. But I'm just saying, I'm not putting them now just because I want this deck to last for until the next time we get support, and the meta may slow down until then, because now Luard is becoming more prominent, so we'll see how it goes. But so that's the grade 2 lineup. Don't forget that you can fiddle around with the counts of the cards. This is just how I've done it so far, because this has been running really well for me. Next up we have the most important grade 1 in the deck, which is Commander Laurel. And yes, I used to play him at 3, but I've bumped him up to 4 because he's even more important now. If you don't know his skill yet from being annoyed by him, let's go over it one more time. Auto. When your Dimension Police Vanguard's attack hits, you may rest 4 of your Dimension Police Rearguards. If you do, you choose one of your Vanguards and stand it. So, Laurel needs you to hit anything. You can swing with your Vanguard at the rearguard. If it hits the rearguard, you can use Laurel. Just make sure that you have, 4 to rest. You can include him in the resting as well. Just don't forget it has to hit. So, another reason, reason why we put Laurel at 4 is because of this little guy. So, when you use Daihawk, you're putting in a lot of resources, but because you're striding, and you're pretty much always striding into Dai-Earth, you go into Dai-Earth, you call out a grade 2, like maybe Dairessen or Daijet, and a grade 3, like one of these. I recommend calling out Great Dayusha so you don't lose him into the damage zone. So you have your 2 units in the front. Then you just need another unit behind one of these, and then Laurel on the other side. And then if you hit a rearguard, for example, you're going to be getting 6 cards from drive checks in that turn if you don't hit any draw triggers. So Laurel is even more important now because you really want to have him on your very, very first stride when you use Daihawk. If you do use Daihawk, if you're going second, then you can just stride normally. But he's a super, super important grade 1, and I did advertise him at 3 before in the previous deck list, but he has been bumped up to 4. just because he is that important. And yes, I know he is expensive. We didn't get a reprint in English, which I was hoping we would, but you know, life's tough, sadly. So he is the most important grade 1, but let's go over another really good grade 1 for this deck, which is Dimensional Robo Operator Yuka. Yuka's skill is quite simple. It's a GB1. When this unit is placed on rearguard circle, choose one of your other units with Dimensional Robo in his card name, and he gets plus 4k power until end of turn. So I put her down to 3 now. I used to run her at 4 just because I wanted to cut space for another grade 1 that we'll be going into, which is always good. She's a good ride target because she has Dimensional Robo in her name, and you know, she's also good because she's a 7k and she pumps up something by 4. Sometimes you'll give it to your Vanguard to finish up that magical number, like go up to 36 or 46, you know, depending on what you're doing. But I really like her for that plus 4. The only other thing that really powers up, you know, directly is Daijet. So Yuka is a really good card. You can play her at 4 by putting down one of the grade 3s, as I mentioned earlier. So you know, there's that. But she's still a very good card. Very simple effect, but she's still going to be solid for quite some time. Next, we play 4 Perfect Guards, and they're the Dimensional Robo Perfect Guards, so Dai Shield. So nothing too special here, but we played the D Robo ones just because it has Dimensional Robo in its name, so when you do ride it, it counts toward your total of 3 soul, so in case you don't use the Dai Hawk, then you know, you are going to need that, so it's important for that. And I don't recommend the other Perfect Guards. I actually kind of, you know, think it's best to play Dai Shields because you do get good countercharge from Dai Bazooka, and you will be refreshing Dai Bazooka by putting him back into your deck with the Legion, so there's that. Then our final grade 1, which is something that, you know, we basically learned from Japan, is reducing monster weaking at 2. Weaking skill on rearguard circle is when your Vanguard attacks or is attacked, you may Soul Blast 2. If you do, you choose a unit in your opponent's front row and it gets minus 10k power until the end of that battle. He's basically your use of surplus soul. So when you're using Dai Hawk, you're putting in 4 units. You need 3 Dimensional Robo units in your soul. So you know, if you go like grade 1 Dimensional Robo, grade 2 Dimensional Robo, and then Daikaiser, and then Great Daikaiser, you'll have 3 by default, so this will give you an extra 4. If you go straight into Great Daikaiser, you have 2, so this still gives you an extra 3, so you can use it at least once, and then if you re-ride or if you soul charge from Dai Bazooka, you have this little surplus that you can use it on. And you know, Dimensional Police in general just didn't have many good Soul Blast cards before, and at least until, not until the good Grand Gallop support, but Weaking is just a really nice card that, like, I never really paid too much attention to it until it topped in Japan. And you know, now I really realize that its strength, it's a super cool card, and it can help you both defensively, which might be your main use of it, or it can help you seal off the game by Soul Blasting 2 if you know your opponent might not have a Perfect Guard, or if they just, you know, if you're just going for that complete YOLO, I really want to win this right now kind of play. So Weaking is a cool card. He might be swapped out if we get some like promo or something good for Dimensional Robos, or just for Dimensional Police in general. But right now he's a very nice card. I really like him, and the fact that he only costs soul and uses up the surplus that Daihawk provides is a definite big plus. Finally, let's go over the triggers. So this is a trigger lineup that I also kind of like, you know, it wasn't my initial test, it's something that I concluded with after some time. So first off, we have the very standard 8 crits, so 4 Die Wolves and 4 Die Battles. And Die Battles before was just kind of like, it's just a Dimensional Robo crit, it's just there because of its name. But now it has a skill in the soul, which allows you to take it out of the soul and put it into the drop zone, and give your Vanguard a plus 3k buff. So before you wouldn't really put it into the soul unless you soul charge it with Dai Bazooka, but now with Dai Hawk being around, it's actually okay to throw it down and put it into the soul with Dai Hawk, so you can actually use it after. So we have 8 crits, and then very standard we have the 4 Go Rescues, so the 4 Dimensional Robo heals. And you know, you do want to be playing Dimensional Robo triggers because you do need the Dimensional Robo soul. And finally, and while I don't like this too much, we have the 4 draws. Why the 4 draws? Because I started realizing that stands weren't doing as much as I wanted them to, and I'm asking, you know, some friends who also play Dimensional Robos what they're running. You know, we've been discussing, and some of them are playing 6 crit, 3 draw, 3 stand. I think that's fine with Yuka being the stand, because with Yuka you give the Vanguard basically like when it attacks, if it's 37 or more, then you draw a card. So because you have Laurel and you're going to be restanding with a lot of stuff, it's essentially quite fine to, you know, play the Yuka, and then, you know, you get a draw on the first attack, and then you restand and get a draw again. So I do understand if you want to play stands. I personally, through all my testing, they just weren't doing as much as these draws, because these draws are... I personally don't like draws because, you know, it's a 5k shield, it doesn't help you, you know, win the game immediately as stands or crits do, but I can put these draws with Daihawk, and that's good. They kind of balance out what I'm negging with Daihawk, and that's good. So he's overall an alright card, and I think, you know, just, yeah, like, you know, I'm not the biggest fan of draws. I used to be before, but not so much now. My eyes have been opened, you could say, but I feel like it's okay to play them in this deck because you just need them for the Daihawk, and that's pretty much it. So now let's go into the G Zone, which is also quite packed and has some quite expensive and new cards. Alright, so taking a look at the G Zone, we're gonna go over with the first of the new cards, well, the main new card for the G Zone at least, which is Dimensional Robo Command Chief Final Daimax. We play him at 4, and you can play him at 2, but let's go over his skill and then I'll explain why. So, Daimax's skill is an act once per turn. It doesn't have any GB2 or GB3s, you can do it on first stride if you want. But his skill is Persona Flip. If you have a heart card with Dimensional Robo in its card name, until end of turn, this unit gets plus 10k power. Then, if the number of face-up cards in your G-Zone is 2 or more, it gets critical plus 1. Then, if the number of face-up cards in your G-Zone is 4 or more, all of the units in your front row with Dimensional Robo in their card names get plus 5000 power and plus 1 crit. So, this card is a perfect stride for Dimensional Robos. Why? I explained this on my Facebook page and I mentioned it in the set breakdown as well, but what Dimensional Robos were lacking is that they have these like steps where like it goes into grade 3, and then always after going into grade 3, your first stride is going to be Die Earth, because it fetches out units, it's a good first stride, you know, overall it's great. And then you have these options. You either go into Daikaiser Leon, but for that you want your opponent to be at 4 or 5. If they're at 3, then you're in a bit of a weird position. You might go into the X-Tiger, or you might go into something else that you might be running that I'm not running. But you know, you had this weird step in between, or you break ride. But then, you know, if your opponent's at 3 damage, then yeah, that's a good time to break ride. But if you don't check grade 3s, or if, you know, if they have enough to guard, then, you know, you're not going to be doing that well. Daimax provides that perfect step in between, where it's like, I've done my Die Earth, and now, if the units that I called out with Die Earth are still alive, I can give them 5k and a crit. I can give my rearguards a crit, and I can swing with, you know, a 41 with just, you know, with 3 damage if it hits, because he gives plus 1 crit to himself, and then a plus 1 crit to the whole front row, including himself. So he's such a good stride. You know, I was a bit confused when he was that expensive in Japan, like he was more expensive than he was in English, but overall, like, he's a super good card that does deserve the price tag in my opinion, and I play him at 4 because, like, yes, that timing that I described is the best timing to stride him at. So it's like your opponent's at, like, you know, 3 or 4, but they're not at 5 yet, where you can go into Daikaiser Leon safely. So there is that timing, but there are timings later on where you're like, if I hit him with, you know, if I have this crit pressure, like when they're in 4, like, just, it's gonna be perfect because I have crit pressure everywhere. So, you know, he doesn't pair up with Laurel that well because, you know, you give crits to everything, but then, you know, if you hit with this, you're doing 3 damage, so usually the game ends anyway, and then, you know, if they're not dead, then you can Laurel them again for another 3 damage. But, you know, Daimax is just such a good step in between, and, you know, he doesn't require Laurel on board as well, honestly. So, just overall, really good card. Synergizes perfectly with Die Earth if those 2 units didn't die, but, you know, your opponent can always call them back and then use his skill to put the crits and the power on the rearguard circles. So, super, super, super good card. I really love him, and also I mentioned that I would point out about his design. He really resembles Choginga Gurren Lagann for me, like he's super, super look-alike, just because, you know, it's kind of a battleship essentially, and it is drawn by Obari, who is my favorite illustrator of all time, and I actually have this panel which is signed by him. I can actually show you right now. So I've never shown this before on a video, but here you can see this is Obari's signature to Chris. So super, super cool. This is one of my most prized possessions, and my friend Chiro got it for me in Singapore, so it's super, super, super amazing, and one of my most prized possessions, as I said. So, you know, he is my favorite illustrator of all time, and he's the one that gave birth to Daikaiser, so I'm very, very, you know, happy to have any cards that he draws, and, you know, this is such a great addition to them. I really wish he got animated, because then it'd be a bit easier to see where his eyes are, and now, you know, while we're still talking about him, I can actually point out. So I'm going to use this drill to point out exactly where his eyes are. So if you see, this thing I'm circling now is his head, this little round thing. And if we look a bit closer, and like here you see this little line that I'm drawing over with the drill now, this little line is his eyes flashing. So those are his eyes, and then he has this little helmet on top. So this is a little helmet, which is also like kind of an interesting shape, and then, you know, this green thing is his chest essentially, and then these are, you know, the rest of his design is quite easy to understand, but I was just having so much trouble finding his eyes, but he's essentially just like looking in this direction, so he's kind of looking like that while his body is posing a bit like that. So that's kind of like, that's the part of his design that I found really confusing. Like, it took me so long to notice where his eyes are, and then like people from the Dimensional Police group on Facebook actually pointed it out to me. So, you know, I'm glad to have finally found his eyes, and I hope, you know, if you didn't know already, that I helped you as well. So now that we've talked about him enough, let's go over the rest of these strides and the ones that I keep referencing, because this deck does now stride a bit more than it did before. So the next card is legendary Dimensional Robo, Daikaiser Leon. We play him at 4 copies because he's such a perfect stride to go into when your opponent's at 4 or 5 damage. Let's go over his skill. So, an act once per turn GB2. You counterblast 1 and Persona Flip. If you have a hard card with Kaiser in its card name, so not Dimensional Robo but Kaiser, until end of turn, this unit gets auto. When your drive check reveals a grade 3 card, choose up to one of your opponent's guardians, retire it, and that unit's effects with cannot be hit are nullified. I see this card as also as a Gurren Lagann reference. It looks like Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann because of his kind of like astral body made up of galaxies and universes. So, and also it's a reference to Singapore, which is the lion on his chest. Obari said so himself actually, which is also really cool. So, you know, I think, you know, if I was Singaporean, I'd be feeling a lot of pride for that. But he's a super good card, as I said. When your opponent's at 4 or 5, he doesn't have crits on his own. That's like the only part that he's missing. But that's why when your opponent's at 4 or 5, he's so much pressure because you're going through 3 drive checks of a possible grade 3, and that's like your opponent gets so uneasy because of that. So, and, you know, and if they're at 4 and you don't get a crit and they hit, you know, then he's gonna be at 5. If you have a Laurel, you restand, and then you're doing that cool pressure point of like you're at 5 damage. If I check a grade 3 and if you don't have enough shield, then I'm gonna win. You know, so we play him at 4 because there's quite a few times you can go into him. You know, he's like, if they're at 4 and you didn't win, there's like, damn it, you get your next turn, you go into him again, you try again. You know, maybe he's also really good after you've break ridden. He's like a really good strike to go into as well, and so is Daimax. So like if the game goes a bit longer than it's supposed to, then they're both really good for that. Then next up we play 2 Die Earths. I did play around with 4 for some time, but I felt like I was missing my G-Guards that I could be playing instead. So we have him at 2, and he is your pretty much always your first stride. Unless you G-Guard a lot before you stride, he will pretty much always be your first stride. So, 99th generation Dimensional Robo Commander Great Die Earth. His skill is an act once per turn. Counterblast 2 and Persona Flip. If you have a hard card with Dimensional Robo in its card name, search your deck for up to 1 grade 3 and 1 grade 2 card with Dimensional Robo in its card name, call them to separate rearguard circles, and shuffle your deck. Then if the number of face-up cards in your G-Zone with Dimensional Robo in its card name is 2 or more, this unit gets +1 critical until end of turn. That +1 critical part sadly is almost never going to happen because you're almost always using him as a first stride, and there are no Dimensional Robo G-Guardians, you know, to make that happen. So Die Earth is amazing. Once again, he partners super well with Daihawk, and you know, they just go in together. You put in your 4 units and then you call out another 2 with Die Earth. He's really good. And now another thing is when you play the deck, make sure that when you go, you know, you ride your grade 2, don't go super aggressive and call out your, you know, other rearguards to attack with unless you're really certain of it, because you need 2 damage when you ride grade 3 to, you know, 2 face-up damage to use his skill. There have been, you know, when I was testing this, you know, I go into grade 2, I call out my front rows, you know, attack, and then my opponent's like, okay, you're on 1 damage. I'm just gonna kill off your rear guards and not give you the second counterblast, and like, you can have your first stride, but you know, you can't use Die Earth because you don't have 2 open counterblasts. So that's another reason why the 10k vanilla is good, because you can go into it, not call anything else. Your opponent can't poke you with, you know, random grade 2, so you're not taking too much damage, but they still attack with their Vanguard, you know, to do 1 damage, or, you know, 2 if they get a crit. But that's why the 10k vanilla is also really good, even though the meta, you know, even without the meta requiring it. So Die Earth is just super amazing stride. It's always been amazing. It's just such a great card because it fetches you 2 things. As I mentioned earlier, because you have to select a grade 3, try to always select Great Dayusha, because you don't want to be damage checking all your Great Dayushas because you'll only be running 2 or 1. I didn't mean to do that. But, you know, you want to just call him out here, because unless you're playing against something that could bind him, then don't. Like if you're playing against like Narukami or something, then, you know, if there's a chance he's gonna get binded, then don't. But otherwise, you know, the safest place for him is in your hand, obviously. But you know, you don't want to drive check him when you don't want to have him in hand when you want to do your you know, Legion combo. So there's that. And then the final stride that we're playing is X Tiger. So X-Tiger is super simple. When he attacks a Vanguard, you can flip a G-unit face up, and then he gets plus 4k power for each face-up card in your G-zone, and then if his power is 45k or more, he gets an extra critical until the end of that battle. I still think he's a good stride to this day. He's just a better blitzer, and you know, in late game he's gonna be, you pretty much never use him in early game in this deck because you have Die-Earth instead, but X-Tiger is just so good for late game. You have so many face-up G-units and you're like, okay, I've burned through all your perfect guards, you haven't recycled any, let's go for game, and then he hits for this huge power number and just, you know, seals off the deal. So I really like him for that, and I think he's still a very nice stride to go into, especially for late game, and his SP is also very sexy. So let's go over our 5 G guards, and now when we get to this last slot, I'll tell you my little, you know, kind of dilemma. But first off, we have Super Cosmic Hero X Caribou. X Caribou's skill is, when you guard with him, if your opponent's attacking unit's power is 30k or more, this unit gets plus 10k power until the end of that battle. Then you can choose a card from your hand and discard it. If you do, you choose one of your Vanguards and give it plus 4k until the end of turn. So I only play one of him because in a lot of games I've played, my opponents keep swinging for 26, 26, 26. They never really go up to that 31, you know, unless it's with their rears. So in that case, you know, then I do go into him. But, you know, he's still a very nice card. You'll really rarely use his second part of the whole discard for plus 4. It's only really to kind of defend yourself against rearguard attacks. Like if they're swinging for 11, you can deny it by discarding, and then you save 2 cards essentially if there's 2 attacks or something like that. So, you know, well, you save 1 card technically because you still discard 1. So he's overall a really nice G-Guard, but just because of, you know, it might be different in your locals, in your region, but just in all the games I've been playing for these last few months, I just don't have enough opportunities to use him. Like I used to play him at 2, but I just never use a second one, so instead I have the 2 Enigman Patriots because my opponent much more often hits me for 20k or more rather than 30k or more. So Enigman Patriot's skill is, when you guard with it, if your opponent's attacking unit's power is 20k or more, he gets plus 5k shield until the end of that battle. So it's a 20k shield, well this is a 25. I like it at 2 because, you know, that's the number of attacking power that I'm going to be defending against the most. This is really good G-Guardian, so, you know, just dropping it like that is very good. And then our next G-Guardian is the new one, which is Gallant Incarnation G05. So his skill is, when you guard with him, you can Soul Blast 1 card with 5,000 or more power. And in this case, the only one you can't Soul Blast is one of our critical triggers. Everything else you can Soul Blast. So if you do, he gets plus 10k shield until the end of that battle. Then, if basically you took a damage this turn, he gets another plus 5k shield. So his second part is basically like if, you know, you use him for your second defending attack or something like that. But overall, like, again, you're gonna have surplus of soul through all the Dai Bazooka checks and through Dai Hawk. So that's why we play him. You might not go into him all the time, but I think he's quite useful because in the end he's a 30k shield, which is a lot for just 1 heal trigger and a Soul Blast. So very good card. And now our final G-Guard is one that is, like I said, kind of a dilemma. So the one I have here is Dismal, so it has resist, and when you guard with it, you choose one of your rear guards, and until the end of the turn, it cannot be hit and cannot be chosen by the effects of your opponent's cards. So it's good because it protects your Dai Hawks, essentially. Like, that's just the main reason why. Because it don't, I mean, not Dai Hawks, Dai Jets. Like, Dai Jet is the one, grade 2, you don't really want to die because it just keeps recycling a grade 3, so it's good for that. But I put this here also because it's a bit more accessible than Aglium, which is the other card I would put. So this last slot is for one of these two. Aglium is there because I play draws. Aglium is super good with draws because you can drop the draws to draw something else, and it's really good for that. So if you don't know Aglium's skill, it's when you guard with it, you discard a card and then you draw a card. So if you have an Aglium, play the Aglium. If you don't, then play the Dismal to protect your Dai Jets. And, you know, you can also protect your Laurel from being, you know, hit or, you know, targeted during a battle. So she's also good for that. So it doesn't have to be a front or rear guard, it can be anything. So you can also protect your Dai Hawk if it's being targeted or something. So overall, Dismal is a really good G-Guard, but Aglium can also be good. I'm not sure what I'll be using for tournaments yet between these two, but it will be one of them, because they're just like the best kind of last G-Guardian slot. So that wraps it up for this deck profile of Dimensional Robos. I'm sorry that it's quite long, but I did want to get everything across the board, you know, to make sure everything's understood, because this is my favorite deck of all time, and honestly, if it wasn't for you guys, and if it wasn't for this deck, I'm not sure if I would be playing the game anymore, because the amount of fun that both Daikaiser and Dimension Police as a clan gives to me is just immeasurable to any other clan. And you know, the main reason why I can always stick through the tough is because of you guys, but also because I just really love this deck, and especially Daikaiser's unit. His skill is, you know, nice. It represents, you know, what I feel a lot, but it's also his design that I love so much, and just, you know, there's a lot of association I have with him. So it's just it's kind of a deep talk, but you know, there's that. So I hope that my explanations were fine. If there's anything you're confused by or don't understand or need further clarification for, please do leave it in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer whenever I have time. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope this was helpful to you and to any of you that might be watching in the future. I hope this deck list does age well as well. Don't forget that throughout the video, in case you just skipped through to the end, I did explain every single card choice, so I hope, you know, you did watch through it to understand all of my choices. And so that's actually pretty much it for me. So thank you very much for watching, as always, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.